So is it boundaries that someone's implementing, or is it distance making? Now, when boundaries in a relationship get placed, sometimes they're reasonable, but sometimes they don't seem to fit the situation or the depth that you've created in other areas, so it can be really confusing. So today I'm going to talk about what distance making really is and how it can actually relate to some fears about commitment. So stick with me, you're going to want to hear this one. For those of you who are new here today, I'm Ketra Thompson, and I'm a certified master hypnotist and a life recovery coach. So what I do is I help my clients go back on a subconscious level to reframe issues, beliefs, core beliefs, or things that are holding them back on a subconscious level so that they have a new operating system moving forward. So they can create lots of traction in their life and create the love and life that they want. So if you'd like to learn more about that, there's a link in the description below. You can find out all the information there, and you can set up a totally free consultation call so you can ask me all the questions that you have, and I can give you a little bit more clarity about the situation you're in, and we can see if we're a good fit to work together. So before I dive in, be sure and hit like and subscribe so you can be notified every time I post a new video. So people can suddenly create these boundaries, and there's a lot of talk about boundaries right now, and boundaries are good, but they can also be misused or mislabeled. And creating a boundary that doesn't seem to fit the dynamic of a relationship can actually be a red flag. So it becomes kind of a rule that feels or seems odd. So when these boundaries are rules, they don't actually reflect the emotional state of the connection. Maybe there's depth in other areas of the relationship that seems like you should have some closeness here, but instead this boundary is actually being used to create distance between the two of you. So distance making is a big deal, and I think that it gets sort of a confusing explanation most of the time. So there's a lot of information I could go over here because a lot of this happens inside of a marriage dynamic, but I'm going to mostly focus on the dating world and how it ends up happening there. So let's say you might have a lot of really passionate sex. You might be connecting sexually regularly, but this person doesn't want you to meet any of their family or friends. So they have this really deep physical intimate connection with you, but they're not letting you into this other part of their world. Or what about if you spend every weekend together for a year, but the person won't plan a trip with you or a vacation with you 2 months out into the future? It feels odd because you've already spent a significant amount of time together and it doesn't really make sense, but this person is kind of implementing these rules or giving you some reason why they're just, don't move at that pace, or they're not ready. Or maybe it's something more simple, like you spend the night at their house all the time, but they won't let you keep a toothbrush there. They don't want any of your things there. And it doesn't really make sense because otherwise, in every other conversation, they want you there. They're asking for you to be there, but they don't want any of your things there. All of these responses are commitment phobic responses. And it's creating distance. It's creating enough space and distance between you and the other person. So distance making happens, again, inside marriages when the reality of this commitment has set in and they start creating distance in a marriage. And I think I'll do another video to just go over that. But in the dating world, it happens when someone has some level of fear around a new level of commitment, taking this next step, whatever that step is in their mind. So just about anything can trigger this fear, but it's usually at a point where they realize that the person they're with, that they've been trying so hard to connect with, has now fallen for them and wants a new level of commitment. So in the beginning of these relationships, a lot of times this commitment phobic person comes on really strong. and they kind of pour it on. They're trying to win this person over. They want to spend time with them. They're excited about it. And after a while, even if the other person maybe isn't all that interested in the beginning, the other person ends up really caring about them because they see how much effort they're putting in, and they start creating a relationship, and they start letting them in more, and they have a sexual connection and are spending lots of time together. And at that point, there's something that happens where the commitment phobic person that is distance making pulls back. And they want to create a buffer between the two people so that they don't feel trapped. Because this is almost a physical sensation where their chest gets tight and they start panicking and they think they're going to be trapped in this relationship. So to create distance, they will create any kind of narrative in their mind so that they can justify it. Because the first thing you need to know is that these people aren't necessarily awful people, but they also don't want to be seen as the bad guy. So they start creating a narrative, a negative narrative that justifies them being able to leave whenever they choose to. So that requires fault finding. So they start looking for faults, things they didn't notice before, things that weren't there before, and they start picking apart the other person. Either they say it out loud or they're just doing it in their mind. And they're thinking, well, this person doesn't do this and doesn't do X, Y, and Z and has this issue. And they're usually things that are menial. Pet peeves, things they've known about the whole time. And all of a sudden they're making them bigger than they once were. The other thing that happens is someone who's really commitment phobic, who doesn't want to have a level of vulnerability with someone else, is they will purposely sometimes choose cold or distant partners because that partner never lets them stop the chase. And they know deep down, even on a subconscious level, that that person isn't going to commit to them, even if they marry them. That person isn't going to challenge them to be vulnerable because that person is also very distant and cold and shut down. So it's safer for them. They don't have to be vulnerable with them, and it's easy for them to find fault with those people because it's so obvious that they're cold and distant that if this commitment phobic type person wants to leave, they feel justified in leaving because they feel like, after all, this other person is so bad, right? So they still can leave and not feel like the bad guy. Just to recap a little, sometimes these relationships start out really dreamy in the beginning, and then they start to pull back when something real is asked of them. Real communication, real interdependence, real integration into each other's lives. Something real is usually the trigger. And you've heard that term where, oh man, shit just got real, right? It's that moment, right? When they realize in some small way, it could just be a gesture that the person does for them, that this is real. This person expects something of me. And I'm not prepared to give in a full way to the relationship. I'm not prepared to be that responsible, reciprocal, equal partner. And so they start pulling back. And so they feel trapped. They feel scared. They feel like they have an unrealistic view of activities in their life that they think they're going to end up missing out on. And I want to expand on that a little bit. So this unrealistic view is kind of like they think, it's kind of like when you look back and you have, this really warm fuzzy memories about the past, but they might not be realistic. So you think about, oh, well, they're going to make me not be able to hang out with my friends anymore. They're going to make me not be able to travel to the places I want to go. They're going to make me be stuck doing whatever they want forever. When it's probably, first of all, not true at all. But secondly, those things probably rarely happen. Like maybe they only hang out with their friends once a month. Maybe they have a busy career and they only do it a couple times a year. Maybe they only go on a trip by themselves once a year or less, right? So they're thinking about these things like, I'm going to miss out on these things. I'm never going to be able to go. When in reality, they barely ever do those things anyway. And in a reciprocal relationship, probably their partner wouldn't care at all if they go hang out with friends or go on a trip by themselves or whatever. But they're making them bigger than they need to be. So they're blowing it out of proportion in their mind. And the thing is, this is all trauma related. So our subconscious mind is running over 95% of everything we think, feel, and do. And as humans, we want connection. We want authentic, deep connection. We want to feel safe. We're meant to be together. We're very tribal people. So we have this huge desire. But then when you look back at childhood circumstances or past circumstances where you haven't been able to trust a relationship, where parents got divorced when you were young, where you might have had a parent that died, where you didn't have the nurturing or the attentiveness of a parent that you needed, and that little part of you decided that you can't let anyone in, that you can't trust anyone, or that they're going to trap you like a little child that feels like they're under the thumb of their parents. They haven't learned how to be assertive and tuned into what their own wants, needs, and desires are as an adult. And so because of that, this panic and fear bubbles up inside of them, and it keeps them from having the authentic relationships that they would want to have. Because let's face it, any healthy relationship with people who are both striving to grow and learn and heal those things inside of them is going to have reasonable conversations that include the space that each person needs, right? That's where you can reasonably say, I need some space. I need a weekend to myself. And you can communicate it without this little kid inside of you being terrified that if you say something wrong, you're going to be chastised, you're going to get in trouble. And so instead, they just run away. And they sabotage every relationship, and they end up not having anything meaningful or long-term because they can't let anybody in. They can't be vulnerable. They're too afraid of rejection, and consequently, they end up alone. And so this mental process can be very confusing because sometimes this distance making or commitment phobic person just really does want connection, and they're also terrified. So a lot of the work I do is based on integrating those old traumas, integrating this old belief system, reframing it so that you can function in the way that you want to function in life. Because going against our programming feels exhausting and confusing, especially when we don't know what's going on. We might want to stop certain behavior, but we might not know how to do it. And this is why doing the deep subconscious work really matters, because people end up feeling so conflicted. They say they want one thing and then they do another. And so when we're dealing with someone like that, first of all, I want to mention that it's not your job to change them. It's not your job to convince them that they're commitment phobic and they should really, do something different. You're working against some very deep programming. It's best to not attempt to change someone else. But if you find that you yourself have this issue and you don't want to live like this anymore, then it's time for you to get some help for yourself. And the other thing I want to mention is, I mentioned the dynamic of someone who's commitment phobic choosing someone who's cold and distant and shut down to be with. So sometimes you might not think that this is you, but you end up continually, repeatedly choosing someone who is not willing to be emotionally available, who is distant and cold and keeps you guessing. And if that's a pattern in your life where you tend to feel like you've been the victim of this cold, distant, shut-off person, yet you've stayed with them for a very long time, or you have continued to get in relationships with people like that, then there may be a part of you that is terrified of deep, authentic, vulnerable connection. And if that's the case, then you will want to work on these things too. So the first thing you can do on your own is to take a bit of an inventory. Ask yourself what the pattern in your relationships are, and don't start with your most recent ones. Go all the way back. Start with the oldest ones first. Start writing down whether or not this person was really available to you, whether you were truly available to them. And once you've written down all the information about your past relationships, now look at your childhood and pay attention to whether or not your needs were actually being met. And start asking yourself some of the tough questions. Am I doing this to myself? Am I self-sabotaging? Am I afraid of rejection so much that I'm not myself with the people that I am around, or I'm trying to date, or my friend group, or whatever? You want to be really honest about it, but keeping in mind, this type of commitment issue shows up most in your committed, emotional, intimate relationships, but it can also show up in other areas where you can't make a decision very easily about new purchases. A big purchase like a car, or maybe you can't commit to buying a home even though you can afford to, or you can't commit to buying some electronic device or something because you just keep changing your mind and there's just too many options. That can actually be an indication of this being an issue in your relationship life too. So start taking a personal inventory. And then the second step is decide what your next step is to get help, because we don't conquer things on our own. We need a guide, we need some insight, we need someone else that's going to be honest with us. And then of course, I'm preferential to hypnotherapy because it reframes this stuff on a subconscious level. And doing it on a subconscious level creates the biggest changes in your life. So if you'd like to find out more about that, check out that link in the description. I would love to have that consultation call with you, help you get some clarity on your current situation, and really just see if you're a good candidate for this kind of work. It's amazing. And you never walk away from a consultation call with any regrets, regardless of what you decide to do, because you'll have so much clarity. So check that out. And until next time, I hope you curate a life by your own design.